There sure are a lot of things you didn't know videos on YouTube. Maybe I should try and do that with a game series I know a lot about. It's a pretty oversaturated market though, so I'll need some way to one-up the competition. Well, most of these videos are just about one game or one character, so what if I just did the entire series in one video? This was the thought that inspired the video you're watching right now, and I figured it was a great idea until I actually tried doing it and realized it was a terrible idea. I've played each of these games a fair amount, but putting together enough info from each game ended up being surprisingly tricky. As a result, this video ended up taking a lot longer to make than I was originally thinking. I was hoping it would just be something quick I could throw out while working on a big lore-focused video, but obviously that didn't happen, and now I ended up splitting it into two parts. This video covers the classic Kirby games, which I'm considering Dreamland through Superstar Ultra, and I am working on a part 2 which will cover the rest of the games, but for now enjoy the look back through Kirby's history, or just skip to one particular game you're interested in using the timestamps in the description. We won't be talking about HAL rooms or American lawyer John Kirby today. The point of this video is to guarantee you come away from it knowing at least one new thing about these games, whether you're a Kirby superfan or you just clicked on this video by chance. Inevitably, there will be some facts that are more commonly known than others, but I tried to generally avoid some of the most often cited Kirby trivia, as well as mix in some of the things that just stuck out to me personally when playing these games. We're gonna go game by game through the entire franchise and hopefully move pretty quickly, so let's start right away with 10 things you probably didn't know about Kirby's Dream Land. Alright, well this one's a bit difficult since Dreamland's a very short game, so there's not too many hidden secrets. If you're familiar with this game, you probably already know about the extra game and configuration mode. And you probably also know that Castle Lolo, the second level of the game, comes from the Eggerland series of puzzle games, previously developed by HAL. This is, of course, where the characters Lolo and La come from, called Lolo and La in their own franchise, but presumably changed to match DDD and Popopo, Kirby's original name. What a lot of people tend not to mention, though, is that this series is actually where the Kirby 1-up sound effect originates. For example, in The Adventures of Lolo, getting the hammer power-up sounds like this. Also, in case you were wondering, it's named Eggerland because the game centers around turning enemies into eggs using magic and pushing them around to solve puzzles. Also, the main villain is named King Egger. Too bad the series had to go the way of Billy Hatcher. Now, being the first game, Kirby's Dream Land introduced the iconic Maxim Tomato, which restores Kirby's health to full. Or at least it did in Japan. If you read the English manual, for Dreamland and Dreamland only, the manual calls this a bag of magic food. I don't know why the localizers changed this, but it was always intended to be a Maxim Tomato. While we're talking about power-ups, let's take a look at the mint leaf. You may notice it doesn't really look like a mint leaf, and this is due to the fact that it's not a mint leaf. It's a sweet potato, as described again by the Japanese manual. Now, at least according to Wikirby, the reason a sweet potato is used as a power-up is apparently because in Japan, they have an association with giving you the hiccups, which is why it makes Kirby puff out air. But since this isn't really a thing in other parts of the world, it was changed to a mint leaf. It turns out they actually kept this distinction to this day. As recently as Kirby Fighters 2, the Japanese version of the game still uses a sweet potato, while the English uses a mint leaf, which now has its own model. Moving on to some development details, I'm surprised that more people don't talk about how the entire premise of Smash Bros. Originated from Kirby's Dream Land. In Development Secrets of the Original Kirby, Sakurai talks about how the small screen of the original Game Boy inspired a system where you would be sent flying by attacks, with low health sending you flying further, and going fully off screen resulting in a lost life. This is just the entire damage system of Smash Bros. Why did Sakurai take this scrapped idea from Dreamland and put it in Smash Bros? Well, according to him, he just completely forgot about it. Now this one's a bit more well known, but it's worth going over since I see a ton of people saying completely different things about it. Kirby's original color. To be clear, Kirby was never white or yellow. Sakurai always intended him to be pink. Now sometimes you might see game articles or YouTube videos that say Miyamoto wanted him to be yellow, or even that Miyamoto and Sakurai fought over what color to make Kirby, which was why he was white in the American box art. Now, the source that's almost always cited for this is a 1993 developer interview about Kirby's Adventure, specifically this translation courtesy of Shmuplations, which I've linked in the description. In this interview, Sakurai clarifies Kirby was always pink, and jokes about how the staff wasn't certain of Kirby's color until he developed the artwork for Kirby's Adventure. Then Miyamoto chimes in, stating that he remembers thinking pink looked good, and specifically it felt fresh, since normally small round characters like Kirby would have been yellow. Technically, this doesn't even suggest Miyamoto wanted Kirby to be yellow, just that he might have expected it based on similar characters like Pac-Man. As far as I'm aware, the only other possible source of this confusion is some concept art that exists where Kirby was colored yellow, but other concept art also exists where he's colored red, so this can't really be taken as reliable evidence. If there's another interview or something that goes into more detail about this, I'd love to know about it, but as far as I'm aware, Sakurai made Kirby pink, Miyamoto thought it was cool, and the American box art was white because the people who designed it literally didn't know what Kirby's color was until Adventure, and that's what he looked like on the Game Boy. The Super Game Boy Nintendo Player's Guide was a guidebook sold with an issue of Nintendo Power when the Super Game Boy, a peripheral which allows you to play Game Boy games on the Super Nintendo, was released. It contained instructions for how to use the Super Game Boy, as well as short guides for a number of Game Boy games, including Kirby's Dream Land. The only reason I know this exists is because for some reason, this guidebook calls Wispy Woods the Larkspur Lyre, which this title implies is a specific tree that lives in the Wispy Woods, like that's the name of the whole forest. This is the only time this name was used by an official Nintendo publication, and it was never seen again. This whole guidebook is kinda weird in general. It also claims that everyone in Dreamland has the ability to inhale like Kirby, which is probably not true. But I'll link it in the description if you want to read the whole thing. Also, because I was curious, I looked it up. Larkspur is a real plant, but it's not a tree, I think. Missed opportunity to reference this with Flowery Woods. Speaking of the Super Game Boy, the original Game Boy Color gives Kirby's Dream Land this red and yellowish green palette, which I always thought looked kinda strange. There's sort of some clashing colors going on here. However, the default Super Game Boy palette gives the game this neat pink-blue sunset sort of palette, which honestly looks pretty nice considering the technology. The 20th Anniversary Encyclopedia also uses this palette for Dreamland screenshots, so I'd consider this the definitive way to play the game. You see, it's like I said, Kirby was pink all along. Alright, I've stalled long enough, let's talk about the actual game. One of the reasons I wanted to make this video was to show off some obscure mechanics, so let's see. We have inhale, we have spit. Well, did you know that if you die while inhaling a power-up, it'll be active upon your revival? Yeah, this is probably a glitch, not a mechanic, but I don't really have much to work with here. How about secrets? A lot of people know about the secret room in the moon because this sort of became a recurring Easter egg in the series as a whole. But what's lesser known is this secret room hidden in the clouds of Krakow's stage, and even stranger, this place in the room with a long row of blocks where you can go straight through a column and head to the left to get a 1-up past another column. You can inhale this through the wall, or jump to pass through the wall again and pick it up directly. Oh, what else? Kirby dances on the pause screen if you leave him there for long enough. Let's move on to a game with more than 5 levels. Don't worry, I won't be talking about too much pre-release info for this game, just one quick fact to get out of the way. Kirby's Adventure was, of course, the first game to add copy abilities to the series, but there were a lot of abilities that didn't make the cut. In that 1993 interview I mentioned earlier, Sakurai and Iwata talk about how they originally planned over 40 abilities for the game, including one where you could create blocks, shrink, and ride a rocket, as well as an animal ability for scratching enemies, this last one later showing up in Squeak Squad. Sakurai even presented a few design documents on ability concepts in a video about Kirby's Adventure on his YouTube channel, where we can see a kick ability that would later be adapted into Fighter, as well as a self-destruct ability. Not sure how that would work. But now that we have a full game, let's examine some actual game details. Having some optional content, Kirby's Adventure is the first game you could 100%, specifically by finding all of the hidden switches in levels throughout the game. However, something unique to this game is that your save file will be given a title based on how complete it is, with a different one for every 10% of the game you finish. In order, these are Water Drop, Son of Wind, Little Traveler, Swift Hunter, Star Herald, Dream Hunter, Dream Warrior, Star General, Great Ace, Final Star, and at 100%, Hero of Lore, not to be confused with the Heroes of Yore, and if you clear the extra game as well, Superstar. The Son of Wind is particularly interesting to me since Kirby's origin story is simply described as him riding in on the spring breeze one day, ever since the original Dreamland manual. So in a sense, he's sort of a son of the wind. Now, a lot of people tell me, Nova, this Kirby game is just too hard. I mean, 7 mid-bosses in a row, how am I supposed to do this without getting a game over? Not to worry, there's an easy-to-do trick that results in an instant 31-ups to ensure you never run out of lives again. All you need to do is land on each platform of the goal game in order, from 7 up to 1. So land on 7, then 6, then 5, then 4, 3, 2, and finally 1. Upon landing on 1 after doing this, the game will give you exactly 31 ups. As far as I'm aware, this works for all Kirby games that have the Cloud goal game like this, meaning Adventure, Nightmare in Dreamland, Return to Dreamland, Triple Deluxe, Planet Robobot, Star Allies, and Return to Dreamland Deluxe. Except for the 3D Classics version of Adventure for some reason, and also not Dreamland 2. Now if that still sounds like too much effort, here's another tip for that boss rush tower in Rainbow Resort. You can just skip Mr. TikTok. The developers forgot to actually remove his door so that it only appeared after you beat him, so if you want, you can just run right past him specifically. Rainbow Resort particularly seems to have a number of small bugs. For example, Stage 3 has a lot of these angular platforms that they only introduced towards the end of the game. It turns out that if you jump directly into the corner of one of these, you can just clip right through them. The reason I know this is because one time I accidentally clipped directly into this wall and just got stuck in here. If you do this before having beat the stage for the first time, I think you're just soft-locked, because you can't really pause and exit. Still, Rainbow Resort is not the worst programmed element of the game. That award goes to the sound test. As you may know, you unlock the sound test in Kirby's Adventure by beating the extra game, which itself is only unlocked after beating the main game. However, for some reason, beating the main game again will reset the flag to lock the sound test, and you'll have to go through the entire extra mode, which I'll remind you, you cannot save in, to re-unlock it. Moving on to a couple of non-glitch oddities, Mix acts very strange in the original Kirby's Adventure. If you were to slow down the roulette and actually look at the abilities, you might notice the options include Normal, Cannon, Mix, and Warp Star, which are all, in fact, not abilities. Cannon doesn't even show up at any point in the main game, although this was probably planned to be used whenever Kirby hopped into a cannon, since this was how the icon was used in the European version of the game, as well as the 3D Classics version. Both the 3D Classics and the remake, Nightmare in Dreamland, ended up removing these from the roulette, so I imagine this probably wasn't intentional. Speaking of copy abilities, here's a simple game tip. Every boss aside from Wispy, DDD, and Nightmare can give you a copy ability in case you lose the one you're using. This is obvious in the case of Paint Roller, Krakow, and Meta Knight, who requires Sword, but less so for Mr. Shine and Mr. Bright, whose stars will grant you the ability they use in the boss fight, Cutter and Fire respectively, although I guess Mr. Bright really uses Burning, and Heavy Mole, whose red missiles give you Sleep, a trick to try and kill you with the auto-scroll, while yellow missiles give you Hammer, honestly one of the best abilities to use on this boss. Essential Kirby lore fact: the reason Heavy Mole works for DDD is because he bribed him with a year's worth of coal. This is true, it's from an old design document that was shown off in the 20th Anniversary Encyclopedia. Translation courtesy of Gigi, link in the description as always. I promise I won't talk about the 20th Anniversary Encyclopedia too much in this video, it just has a ton of obscure Kirby trivia in it, definitely worth looking into if you're a fan. Now, one of the most well-known Easter eggs in Adventure is that this was the first Kirby game to have the first letter of each area spell something, in this case Vibjor, which is the colors of the rainbow backwards. Additionally, the opening cutscenes for each level and their Warp Star stations also showcase the color associated with each level, although if you ask me, Rainbow Resort looks more pink than red. This Easter egg is even carried over to the manual, where in the Japanese version the areas are properly color-coded, but the English one messes it up for some reason, putting it in reverse order, so maybe the localizers got the rainbow motif but didn't catch the Easter egg. I'm not sure, but I am sure I'm the only person in the world who's even mildly annoyed by it. Here's another weird detail. Kirby's Adventure provides the first version of Boss Rush called Versus Boss. It's actually surprisingly difficult compared to later versions of the sub-mode because it has no way to restore health throughout the whole thing. However, this isn't the case if you're playing the Japanese version of the game, where you'll always get a full health restore after beating Heavy Mole. This was kept in the 3D Classics version as well, so I assume it was always intended to be in the game, but was somehow removed through localization. And since I've mentioned it a few times, I'll use my last fact to talk about what the 3D Classics version actually is. You see, the 3D Classics series was a selection of 6 NES-era games that were developed by Arika and published by Nintendo around the early 2010s to show off the stereoscopic 3D abilities of the 3DS. Kirby's Adventure was probably by far the most well-known game out of the selection, and was released on the eShop in 2011 for most parts of the world, for only $7. Unlike the version of Adventure on Nintendo Online, which uses emulation, this version of Adventure for the 3DS is actually a complete recreation of the game, and as a result it has several small changes in addition to fixing slowdown issues. The main point, of course, was adding 3D visual effects that could be used by the 3DS hardware, but other than that I've honestly already mentioned the biggest changes. It's got new doors and some interesting gradient backgrounds for some levels. I've heard some people say this is the definitive version, mostly because it fixes lag issues. It removed the 1-up trick I mentioned though, so I would say no. Well, that makes 10. Let's move back to the Game Boy for... Okay, finally I can talk about the Waddle Dees. Dreamland 2, like most Kirby games, has Waddle Dees, and you've got to understand some of the Waddle Dees in this game act very strange. I mean, most of them are normal, but every once in a while you'll encounter what I like to call the Sleeping Angel Waddle Dees. What these guys do is run at you from off-screen way faster than normal enemies, but freeze as soon as you look at them, and then they only start moving again when you look away. This was just so weird to me when I first saw them, because these guys just show up a couple times in Dreamland 2, and as far as I know, they never did this ever again. Why did they try to jump scare Kirby this one time? We may never know.
It's locked!
Another weird detail is the fact that only in Dreamland 2, Wispy Woods has glasses and a face mask on for the first phase of his fight. Since he can only attack with roots and apples, and the apples in this game don't roll off screen, you can just stand in the corner and never get hit while he's doing this. Of course, after you deal some damage, the glasses and mask get knocked off, and then he can attack like normal. It's never explained in-game why he has this mask. The most common speculation I've seen is that it's a reference to hay fever, allergic reactions to pollen, which is a significant problem in Japan due to cedar and cypress trees which shed a large amount of pollen around the start of the year. As a result, some people may wear face masks or even protective glasses to avoid bothering their eyes and nose. I guess the joke is that Wispy Woods is himself a tree, so it's an ironic situation. Another quick pre-release detail, in the 20th Anniversary Celebration book, which is a different thing from the 20th Anniversary Encyclopedia, I swear it's a different book, on the page about Dreamland 2, some proposal sketches show Kirby riding a tank, which was originally intended to be the vehicle used to shake up gameplay before adding the animal friends. Nothing really remains of this in the final game except for some unused sprites that show one of the mid-bosses riding a tank. If they hadn't replaced the tank, would Kirby have become a military action game? Yeah, that would be pretty crazy. I mean, imagine a tank power-up in Kirby, that would just never happen. Dreamland 2 is well known for being the first game to introduce animal friends, each of which can use copy abilities and have their own unique advantages. Ku is able to fly against strong gusts of wind, Kind is able to swim against strong currents, and Rick lets you walk a bit faster? Yeah, at first Rick doesn't seem to be anywhere near as useful as the other two, especially since he can't fly like Kirby and Ku. But there actually is another secret property that gives Rick a huge advantage. He doesn't slip on icy surfaces. I honestly didn't even notice this until I read through the manual. Dreamland 3 would also later give Rick the ability to wall jump, so you didn't have to abandon him whenever there's a platform you can't reach. But it still seems like he sorta got the short end of the stick to me. I talked a little bit earlier about the Super Game Boy version of the original Dreamland, and Dreamland 2 has a similar enhanced version. However, this time, instead of a simple color palette swap, The Super Game Boy offers more detailed color, including a fully colored title, menu, and ending cutscene. Additional sound effects such as applause on the title and windy ambiance on the level select, and a special border displaying the animal friends. I guess that makes this the definitive version of the game, which is why it's unfortunate it wasn't in the Dream Collection on Wii. Now, a lot of people tell me, Nova, this Kirby game is just too hard. I mean, these auto-scrolling segments where you have to guess which paths don't lead to a dead end are just plain unfair. Not to worry, there's an easy-to-do trick that results in a practically infinite number of lives. You see, if the player maxes out the game's point counter by earning 9,999,990 points, every action that gives points will instead give you a 1-up. I saw this on the Kirby Wiki a while back, but I couldn't find any footage showing it, so I had to verify it myself. It is true, here's what that looks like. I guess this is an infinite lives reward for people who have played a frankly insane amount of this game, but it's definitely not worth it. If that sounds like a bit too much effort, Level 7 Stage 5 presents 3 1-ups for you to collect in every run through the level. However, these are tricky to get because it seems when you enter from the right side of the room, they show up on the left side of the wall, and when you enter from the left side, they show up on the right side. The trick here is that these are actually 2 different rooms with a total of 6 1-ups. And you have to go around the wall by finding this hidden passage under the floor, mirrored in each room. Kirby's Dream Land 2 is also the first Kirby game to have 2 endings, a good ending and a bad ending based on whether or not you got every rainbow drop. Besides the cutscenes, these endings differ significantly because the good ending contains the actual game credits, while the bad ending lists the name of every enemy. Of course, you can't uncollect the rainbow drops, so if you complete the good ending, then want to know the enemies' names, you'll have to beat the entire game again. They did not fix this in Kirby's Dream Land 3, which works the same way, although Kirby 64 found a way around this by moving the character encyclopedia into collectible info cards. Load Kibble? Here's a niche game mechanic detail. For some reason, Dream Land 2 removed the ability to inhale health items and 1-ups. This was present in the original Dream Land, as well as Kirby's Adventure, and would eventually become standard in subsequent games. It was back in Superstar in Dream Land 3, so I'm not really sure why they would put effort into removing it here. Finally, infamously, one of the most annoying parts of 100%ing this game involves collecting the Girl Blob, a character who has a small chance to replace Gooey as the character that pops out of the bag, which normally holds an animal friend you're already using. This character never shows up again and doesn't even really have a name. As far as I'm aware, the term Girl Blob comes from an issue of Nintendo Power, continuing from a sentence where Gooey is just called a blob. So this is really just a statement that this is a female version of Gooey. Of course, the reason the Girl Blob seems randomly thrown into the game is because she's replacing Chao, who shows up in the Japanese version of the game as a reference to Yu Yuki, a game published previously by Nintendo in 1989 which parodies the novel Journey to the West. The sound test image is also a reference to this game, being pulled directly from it and edited to include Kirby characters. This bit of trivia is fairly well known, but I've never seen anyone talk about why Yu Yuki is referenced specifically, especially since it wasn't developed directly by HAL. I'm not exactly sure myself, but Shigeru Miyamoto happened to be a producer of both games, so it's possible he had something to do with it. Alright, now we're talking. This game has a ton of content to cover and a lot of small references and Easter eggs, but you've probably already heard about the Mario cameos and Great Cave Offensive references, so I'll move right past those. Superstar is unique because it contains a number of different sub-games, with more being unlocked as you progress through the game. However, what you might not realize is that some of them are completely optional. In fact, if you consider the arena to be the end of the game, the only game modes you have to play are Dynablade, Revenge of Meta Knight, Great Cave Offensive, and Milky Way Wishes. So you can end up fighting DDD in the boss rush despite having never seen him before in the main game. This was changed in the remake though. In Superstar Ultra you need to complete every mode to unlock the true arena. Let's talk about how this game probably has one of the most obscure abilities in the series, Paint, which isn't given by any normal enemies or mid-bosses or seen in the arena selection. Instead, you can only get this ability from two bosses' attacks, Heavy Lobster's Paint Blob and Camilo Arm's Paint Attack. Using this acts as a screen nuke which deals some damage, and will have the added effect of removing Camilo Arm's invisibility and blinding Heavy Lobster so it has trouble targeting you. The crew of the Halberd will even comment on this with some secret dialogue. Superstar Ultra adds a third instance of the paint ability thanks to an attack Mark's Soul uses as well. Speaking of secret dialogue, there's actually a fair amount of missable dialogue in Meta Knight's Revenge. This includes the crew commenting on you going into this secret room which contains an invincibility candy, entering the clouds here, and finding Mace Knight's secret tomato room. One more from Meta Knight's Revenge. Early in the campaign, you end up facing off against Heavy Lobster in the ship's deck, in what's essentially a playable cutscene, waiting a few seconds before you get blown away. However, if you're quick, you can actually beat Heavy Lobster here, which will give you exactly 30,000 points. Computer Virus is one of the most iconic bosses in the series, unique for mimicking a role-playing game running on an old operating system. At the end of the battle, the top window will even give you points for a number of different attributes, as a cute reference to old games like Final Fantasy. However, these attributes aren't entirely random. If you have a friend with you, the last attribute will always be friendship, and if you don't, it'll be love. Also, these would much later be referenced again in the Kirby Clash series, which is pretty much as close to an RPG as Kirby gets. Alright, let's talk about Milky Way Wishes. There are a number of different ways to completely go around the main gimmick of this game mode, which is Kirby not being able to copy abilities. For starters, this game just outright lies to you when it tells you this. You can actually copy all of the one-time use abilities like Crash, Sleep, and Paint. This itself allows you to access Mix, at which point you can get any ability in the game without ever finding a copy essence. For example, I do it here at the beginning of Planet Hopbeat, and as you can see, my inventory is completely empty. Why is it looking at me like that? However, this isn't even the only way to do it. In the Computer Virus boss fight at Half Moon, the game will offer you copy abilities which you can take regardless of if you found them. Now, this doesn't unlock them, but it does allow you to create a helper. At this point, you can damage the helper, or in two-player mode, repeatedly press A to make it start self-destructing, then touch any other enemy to have the helper copy them, like they can in other modes. Of course, this is all avoiding the developer intended way to go around the gimmick, which is to visit this mystery planet and pick up the copy ability, which lets you take the power of any enemy, just like Kirby normally could. This ability seems sort of useless initially, but it actually has some interesting properties. For example, it allows you to copy enemies that you normally can't inhale. This is how we know Scarfy actually gives the Crash copy ability, which makes sense since they explode after chasing Kirby. You can even scan mid-bosses to copy their abilities before defeating them. And since I mentioned Half Moon, now's a good time to point out that this sprite, which is thrown into some of the starry terrain in this level, is just Mimas, one of the actual moons of Saturn. This large impact crater is named the Herschel crater, after the scientist who discovered the moon. And yes, its main claim to fame is that it looks like the Death Star from Star Wars. Superstar was also the first game to include different types of food as healing items, rather than just the normal energy drinks and Maxim tomatoes. I imagine this was mostly done for the sake of Gourmet Race having some variety. However, several of these Nintendo must have figured would be unfamiliar to a non-Japanese audience, because they were changed for the international version of the game. This includes dango, a type of dumpling made from rice flour often served on a skewer, which was changed to a crepe, omurice, a dish consisting of an omelet with fried rice, replaced with pancakes, takoyaki, a ball-shaped snack made of batter and filled with octopus, replaced with a club sandwich, Sushi replaced with hot dogs, you'd think most people would know that one. Makizushi, or rolled sushi, replaced with lobster. Tendon, a rice bowl with fried fish with french fries. Mochi, Japanese rice cake with peas. Nikuman, or steamed pork buns with orange juice. Nori senbei, rice crackers and seaweed with cherries. Oden, boiled tofu, vegetables, eggs, and meat on a skewer with a candy cane. Taiyaki, fish-shaped cakes with flan. And onigiri, rice balls replaced with cookies. Finally, let's wrap back around to the menu for a small detail you may not have noticed. Each of the save files will display a unique sprite of Kirby based on the last subgame you played. I'm not going to list all of them since I'm still tired from the food list, but you can pause the video if you want a better look. Dreamland 3. This is the most underrated Kirby game. That doesn't count as one of the facts, but it is true. This game has a ton of quirky little enemies, so let's start out by looking at a couple of those. Apollo is an enemy that first shows up on the 6th level of Grassland, and has the unique property of healing Kirby when eaten, instead of giving an ability. This is probably a reference to a type of Japanese candy called Apero, which are these cone-shaped strawberry chocolates produced by the company Meiji. As you can see, they look pretty similar. Apollo also shows up in Cloudy Park with this new blue color scheme. These ones don't heal Kirby for some reason. This little rabbit enemy in the first stage of Sand Canyon is named Polof, and will lead you to a secret room in the wall if you watch him for a little bit. This is the only time this enemy shows up in the entire Kirby series. They don't even use him again in this game. They created an entirely unique enemy just for this one-up. Batamon is a pretty weird enemy. These guys look like knockoff Kirbys, and you'll encounter them a few times throughout the game, always in inaccessible areas, preventing you from inhaling them. However, there is one secret area that allows you to directly interact with one. In Cloudy Park 3, walking through this wall at the end of the stage will take you to a secret room with lots of Batamons, and one you can actually inhale to discover it does absolutely nothing. Are the weird Kirby clones you have to defeat in the last stage of Dreamland 1 also Batamons? I don't know, but I'll choose to believe it anyway, because otherwise I really have no idea what's happening there. Now the arena mode of this game, called Boss Butch, is unlocked after beating Zero and getting the good ending. There are a lot of interesting details in this game mode, but probably the biggest one is the secret perfect screen that you can only see by pressing X, L, and R after beating Zero before the screen fades to black. I am almost certain that this is an error and that this image is intended to show up when you do the whole thing without taking damage, because that's how it works in Kirby 64. Why would this be accessed through this random input combo you need to hold after beating Zero? It just doesn't make sense. Another neat detail is that you'll get a unique image for losing to each boss, and the version of the credits you get after beating Boss Butch is actually slightly different from the version in the main game. Addo draws an X instead of an O, and the drawings of each of the characters have a more detailed style throughout the credits. Other than that, the images of the characters are the same, but instead of showing all the friends you made at the end, the Boss Butch version shows these images of Dark Matter and Zero. Also, Acro is Orca spelled backwards. This isn't one of the facts, but at least one person watching this didn't notice that until I said it. There are a lot of Dreamlanders you need to help in order to collect all of the Heart Stars, and a lot of them are pretty obvious references to other games. However, some of the more subtle ones can be found in level 6 of Ripple Field and level 6 of Cloudy Park. In these levels you need to help these shape creatures by carving their shape into a bunch of star blocks. This one is named HB002, and this one is named HB007, and both their names come from Mario Picross, since their shapes are a reference to puzzles 2B and 7B respectively in that game. HB2 looks like this diamond shape, and HB7 looks like this wine glass. You might notice that I'm playing the Japanese version of the game, and that's because they changed 7B to a silk hat for the international version, presumably to remove a reference to alcohol. Chao also returns from Dreamland 2, along with Goku, their sprites being pulled directly from Yu Yuki. But this time Donbei and Hikari also show up, being pulled from Shin Onigashami, the first in the series of folktale-inspired Famicom games Yu Yuki is from. This game reintroduces Gui as a helper or second player, and while he has all the same abilities, being able to copy enemies just like the pink puffball, he's arguably the slightly better character, since Gui can use his tongue to eat normally uninhalable enemies, like Scarfy. There's no crash in this game, though, so not much of a point to doing it. Here's an interesting glitch that can be used to get out of bounds in most levels. Rick's rock ability is kinda bugged with how it repositions Kirby when deactivating the ability. Position yourself under a low ceiling, then press Y to turn Rick into a stone ball, such that Kirby sorta looks like he's half inside the ceiling. Then press Y and X at the same time to dismount Rick and deactivate the ability simultaneously. If done correctly, the game will place Kirby in the ceiling, where he will then be pushed up to the nearest surface above him. You can see I use it here to get out of bounds in Sand Canyon, and to collect Donbei without taking the right path in Stage 4. Credit to Ivan F for finding this glitch. His channel has a ton of obscure glitches from the Kirby series and other games that I haven't really seen documented much elsewhere on the internet, so go check that out if it sounds interesting. And finally, I'd like to shine a light on one of the coolest details of this game, these little black bugs that sometimes show up in a few levels. They try to run away from you, and you can destroy them if you step on them, but other than that, they do absolutely nothing. In the volcano level of Sand Canyon, there's also these white ones that don't move and create this green splat if you step on them, but these are completely unrelated to the heart star of the level. I looked it up, and there is one other instance where they show up, in a single room of Canvas Curse, a spin-off for the DS. I don't think they're ever even given a name, but I just think it's kinda neat that they're there. Kirby and the Crystal Shards, the first 3D Kirby game, not to be confused with the first 3D Kirby game. A neat customization detail that I think most people don't notice is the option to change your health bar design in the settings. Along with the default, there's an X's and O's design, this, I guess, poker chip and embroidery theme, this crayon sketch design, and this neon square design. There's also a Japanese calligraphy design that replaces the crayon-drawn one, exclusive to the Japanese version. If you want to shake up your next playthrough, try using one of these. Next, there are 2 secret cheat codes which can be entered onto the title screen, which I don't see much talk about. The most useful instantly gives you a 100% complete save file with all crystal shards and all enemy cards unlocked. In order to pull this off, File 2 must be blank while File 3 is created with no progress. Then reset the game, and while the HAL Labs logo is displayed during startup, insert the Player 2 controller, hold L, and press C up, R, C right, C left, and start in that order. The 1-up sound effect will play to signify it worked, and File 3 will be 100%ed. This is what it looks like. The other code is activated by holding L, R, and Z and pressing A on the title screen. This will make Kirby say hi. Hi! Here's a small story detail that some Crystal Shard fanatics may know. The 3 dark matters that chase Ribbon in the opening cutscene and end up possessing Waddle Dee, Adeline, and Dedede actually have names. According to the Japanese Nintendo official guidebook, Kirby of the Stars 64, published by Shogakukan Inc. and supervised by Nintendo, Dark Rimuru is the name of the one who possesses Waddle Dee, Dark Rimura possesses Adeline, and Dark Rimuro possesses Dedede. This information isn't particularly useful, but if you're obsessed with Kirby lore like I am, you might find it interesting. Also, I mentioned there being a perfect screen for beating the boss rush without taking damage in Kirby 64 earlier. I didn't show it because I was saving it for this section. This is what the perfect screen looks like. It's this perfect Kirby boss amalgamate thing, where he has pieces of each boss attached to him. Is this supposed to be the ultimate copy ability, or did Kirby just tear parts off of each boss to wear as a costume? I'm not sure, but it's a pretty crazy flex either way. Now, a unique mechanic of Kirby 64 is that it allows you to actually take enemies out of your mouth and hold them above your head. The main point of this is to throw them into others to deal damage and combine abilities, but a lot of them actually have hidden properties. Holding a Bronto Burt or propeller above you will launch you into the air a bit, Pateran will let you glide, Bumber and Flora have you fall slowly like the Parasol ability, Cairn and Chili will have the segments of their body fall apart into separate projectiles when thrown. Flopper and Slushy will pull Kirby along as they swim underwater. Glunk, Caney, Fishbone, Spark Eye, and Tick will all use their basic attacks, which can be aimed at enemies. And Bow, Drop, and Sandman all simply dissipate when you try to hold them. There are a couple other effects too, so try this out with some enemies next time you play the game. Also, here are some weird scrapped enemies from the game, courtesy of the Celebration book. This weird humanoid enemy, which Waddle Dee is shown picking up, back from when Waddle Dee, Adeline, and DDD were planned to be playable. And what might be a house enemy that you could pick up and use as a shield, although the text here might imply Waddle Dee could just do this for some reason. I promise I won't talk about the 20th Anniversary Celebration book too much in this video. Now, in case you never bothered to count the sides yourself, yes, Miracle Matter is a D20, meaning that if you numbered the sides, you could use it to play Dungeons & Dragons. That isn't the fact. You see, Miracle Matter is generally considered one of the hardest bosses in the game, so I figured I'd point out some often overlooked details about how this boss fight actually works. Miracle Matter shifts into different forms based on each of the 7 copy abilities, and in each form it can only be hit by one of its projectiles from that form, or a copy ability using an ability that matches its own. If you hit any one of its forms 3 times, it will actually lose that ability and be unable to use that attack, signified by this explosion effect. So if there's one attack really annoying you, you can just focus on that one to remove it from the attack pool. Of course, this means whenever Miracle Matter is one hit from death, it does get stuck doing the same attack over and over again. Another nice detail is that one of its eyes is destroyed for each attack, so you can keep track of its health. Now you might notice 20 isn't divisible by 3, so to account for this the developers just made the bomb ability take only 2 hits to be removed. There's also a glitch in this boss fight that turns you invincible, but it also soft locks you, so don't do that. But do check out this video by FezPez in the description for more detail. Here's a funny or unsettling detail, depending on how you look at it. This spider enemy named Mariel shows up here in the bad ending credits next to a Glom. Glom is an interesting enemy because the only times you see them in the game, they're always hiding inside these holes, only popping out to chew on Kirby for a second when he gets near. Now, because what we see of this model looks like a frog, most people assume Glom is basically just a frog. However, the true ending credits reveals this isn't actually the case, as it swaps the original picture out for one that shows Glom eating Mario, where we can see it's actually not a frog at all, but this long salamander-like thing. So next time you play the game, remember that this is what's hiding in those holes. Another good trivia fact is that this is the only mainline Kirby to not use the standard invincibility theme. Instead, whenever you pick up an invincibility candy, you get this theme unique to Kirby 64. Pretty sure Mass Attack is the only other game in the series to also have a unique invincibility theme, although that one can only be heard by dying 3 times on a level to get a pity candy. Alright, let's end this game off with the biggest revelation yet. Have you ever wondered what the purpose of this shack is at the very beginning of the game? Well, wonder no longer. The Japanese website for Kirby 64, which is actually still up as of this video's release, specifies that this hut by the stream is actually owned by DDD, and it's where he keeps toys for playing in the river. There's not much in the shack though, so I guess they must be in these boxes here? This and other lore critical details, only on the Novastar channel. Well, this isn't exactly a new Kirby game, it's just a remake of an old one. Most of the content is the same, but there is some new content. How do I handle this? Well, how about we just split it down the middle and do 5 facts? Yeah, that sounds good to me. Let's see here. The most notable thing about this remake is that it's the first Kirby game to allow 4 simultaneous players in the story mode, thanks to the GBA link cables. Prior to this, you could only do 4 players for the Crystal Shards sub-games, but this was the first to do it for the main campaign. Google Gemini is in fact wrong. This is what misinformation on the internet looks like. I mean, come on, this isn't even an image of the game you're talking about. Now you might notice from this image I stole from Wikipedia that multiplayer on the GBA can get a little confusing due to the giant tangle of wires that may develop. Not to worry, the old Japanese Nightmare in Dreamland website presents these cable accessories which can be hooked onto each wire to keep track of what color everyone is. They've even got 3 designs for each color: normal, tornado, and star rod, which you can print out and glue yourself at home. This website also came with a free demo of the Quick Draw sub-game, which doesn't work anymore due to the death of Flash, but you can go on the Wayback Machine to try it out today. Or maybe not. Here's a random fact. 3 enemies were completely replaced with new ones for unknown reasons. Founder with Gip, Spiny with Needleless, and most notably, the mid-boss Rolling Turtle with Fan. All the new enemies do the exact same thing as the old ones, same movesets. Needleless still gives Needle, Fan gives Throw, Gip still does nothing. So I don't really know why they did this. At least they fixed the color of Rainbow Resort. Remember when I mentioned that? Well, they made it red now. I notice these things. No one else does, but I do, and I appreciate it. Thank you, Sakurai. Nightmare in Dreamland replaces the original Kirby's Adventure opening with this one where a bunch of Kirbys run across the screen. In a developer interview from Nintendo Dream, credit to Schmoplations again for translation, link in description, designer Teruhiko Suzuki specifies that this opening uses every Kirby sprite in the game. I assume he means every sprite used for normal Kirby. And programmer Eitaro Nakamura states that there are about 120 sprites total. I assume he means the number of individual Kirbys. And because I was curious and also insane, I tried counting them myself. I got exactly 104, but it's entirely possible I miscounted since there are so many running past and crossing over each other. So if you ever have absolutely nothing better to do for an afternoon, try correcting my count and see what you get. This one's kind of obvious, but I wanted to draw attention to it anyway. Meta Knight no longer drops the invincibility candy into levels like he did in the original adventure. Instead, they just show up by themselves. This kinda has interesting story implications, since Meta Knight is one of the friends DDD gave a piece of the Star Rod to. The original Kirby's Adventure could be interpreted as Meta Knight helping Kirby on his quest in the hopes that he would repair the Star Rod and defeat Nightmare, testing him at the end of Orange Ocean to make sure he's strong enough. However, in the remake, he just reads as another of DDD's friends with a piece of the rod. Kinda wish they didn't make that change, to be honest. I was also surprised the first time I played Nightmare in Dreamland that the Howl Room from level 2 of the original game seems to be completely removed, as the trick to reaching it from the NES game doesn't work anymore. Well, it turns out that the Howl Room is still present in the stage data of the remake, but to reach it you need to use cheats since the Warp Star doesn't despawn. Oh shoot, I said I wouldn't be talking about any Howl Rooms in this video. Look at this placeholder icon for the fire ability. That's pretty funny, right? Oh, look at him shoot fire. Okay, that's 5 facts. Let's go to Amazing Mirror. Why didn't they put Mirror in this game? I mean, it's existed since Superstar. I mean, it's so obvious. Anyway, when entering the room for the first boss fight against King Gollum, which is usually the first boss people encounter, you'll end up falling past these stained glass windows. Once we get a good look at them, we can see that they actually foreshadow some of the other bosses, specifically Mega Titan, Gobbler, Wiz, and Krako. I could understand leaving Dark Meta Knight out for the plot twist later, but Molly is missing, as well as Master Hand and Crazy Hand for some reason. Maybe these guys are all friends and decided to make windows dedicated to their friendship, as one does. While King Golem is basically this game's version of Wispy Woods, I assume in the context of the Mirror world, this guy is the king of all the normal Golem enemies. These enemies are actually pretty interesting because they give different abilities based on their attack animation. Normally they just give stone, but if you inhale them while they use an uppercut attack, you'll get fighter. And if you inhale them while they use this rolling attack, they give wheel. This is the only enemy that gives multiple copy abilities based off of their attack when inhaled I can think of off the top of my head. Crank kind of does something similar, but there it's based on the projectile that's thrown, similar to Paint Roller. Let me know if there's another game where they did this, because honestly it would be neat if they did it more often. Speaking of abilities, this was the first game to introduce magic, which in this game summons a roulette which can be used to trigger a number of different effects, including one where all enemies transform into food, one where Kirby becomes invincible, and one where Meta Knight destroys all enemies on screen, which is very considerate of him considering he's currently trapped in the dimensional mirror. This copy ability probably originates from a scrapped card ability that was planned for Superstar, which also had a top hat, And the next game, Squeak Squad, would even add this card-throwing move as a basic attack to Magic's moveset. Yes, I'm pulling from the encyclopedia again. I promise this is the last time. Where does this fit into the Kirby lore? Here's a quick navigation tip. Since the Labyrinth of the Mirror can be tricky to navigate, and a lot of people just don't know this, a small star over a door means it's one way, a large star means it's two-way, and a glowing star means you haven't passed through the door yet. Also, large stone blocks are intended to be moved with all 4 Kirbys using Super Inhale, but you can move them solo very slowly by repeatedly using an ability with an attack that shakes the screen, such as Stone, Fireball, Smash, and Master. Now sure, if you played the game a lot, you probably already knew that, but did you know that according to the in-game maps, there are exactly 263 rooms in the entire game? I guess there's technically a few more if you count the tutorial and the Dark Mine boss areas, but this is the breakdown. Alright, that one's kinda useless. How about the fact that the title screen has a day-night cycle if you stay on it for long enough? That's kinda neat. Alright, I guess that's not very useful either, so let's look at a couple of niche mechanics to actually help you out next time you play the game. If you slide on a slope that's greater or equal to 45 degrees, Kirby will start rolling down the hill, which damages any enemy in his way. As far as I'm aware, the only other game this works in is Squeak Squad, so I guess it's sort of a flagship thing. Jump Boost returns from Superstar, similar to how you could use a helper by holding up when standing on them in that game. Jumping on another Kirby and then jumping while standing on them gives you a large jump boost. Additionally, if you're low on health and call the other Kirbys over to you, you'll be able to kiss to restore health even if no one ate any food recently, so your battery basically can be used as reserve health. Also, just to briefly address it, usually this animation is used to represent sharing food between 2 allies in a Kirby game, but the Kirby Fighters series suggests that it can be used to represent kissing as well, so I figure that's what's going on here when there's no food involved. During the Wiz boss fight, many of the items shot out of its hat give copy abilities, like this car giving wheel and this thundercloud giving spark. One of the items is this purple apple, which in later games damage Kirby if he tries to swallow them. But in this game, copying them gives you the sleep ability, possibly a reference to Snow White, which had a similar scenario. Moving over to another boss, Mega Titan's main gimmick is that it's invincible in the first phase, and you need to use attacks to push it into the electric walls to deal damage. Only it turns out, Beam, Spark, and UFO can all be used to damage it with electric attacks, since what's really going on is that this boss is just weak to electricity in general, one of the few moments when a Kirby boss has specific elemental weaknesses and immunities like this. Like Nightmare in Dreamland, the old Japanese Amazing Mirror website contains sub-game demos that needed Flash as well, and can only be accessed through the Wayback Machine today. More importantly, check out this Kirby cell phone Windows screensaver exclusive to this website. This is an official Nintendo product. That's 9. Let's see, we need 1 more. How about that unused death screen from the prototype? That's pretty crazy, huh? Ooh, it's blood in a Kirby game. Look, it's dark. You know, people go crazy for that sort of thing, but they never talk about the fact that souls can canonically be torn apart and annihilated in this universe. Which, if you think about it, is way more terrifying. I mean, of course living animals have blood, but to have your soul... Okay, so can we talk about how this entire game takes place underground? Like, there's no information about this in the manual, but of all things, the Japanese Virtual Console website describes how in the game, Kirby falls through a giant hole called the Navel of the World, and ends up in the underground. Now, you might think this is just something they threw onto the website. No, this is actually in the game. Presumably we see this at the end of World 1 when DDD throws Kirby into the Squeaks and the narrator describes them all falling into a chasm, which is exactly what we see in the next cutscene. And then, this blew my mind when I first noticed it. All throughout the rest of the game, no matter what biome you're in, the backgrounds have these giant stone pillars in them, which I assume exist to hold up the stone ceiling that's somewhere way above you. Of course, no one notices this since the level map just makes it look like everything's on the surface, but yeah, there's actually this giant underground fully developed world constantly existing under Popstar's surface. Now you might be thinking, oh, that's why they call Dark Nebula the ruler of the underworld at the end of the game. No! I mean, Possibly, but in the original Japanese, Dark Nebula is simply called the Ruler of Darkness, meaning the localizers would have changed this to make Nebula specifically rule the underground, where the game takes place. Also, in Japanese, Dark Nebula is called Dark Zero, but I'll let someone else deal with the lore implications of that. Now, the infamous strawberry shortcake, which kicks off this game's plot upon being stolen, never actually gets recovered, as the game eventually ends with the Squeaks giving Kirby a new one. However, if you slow down the opening cutscene, you can see that it's clearly some random Waddle Dee that steals the cake. I guess he just gets away with eating it off-screen while all the events of the game happen, so good for him. Also, I will count this as a fact. This is actually the only game where the plot's kicked off by Kirby's cake being stolen. Never happens again in the entire series. It's a common misconception that it happens to him every Tuesday or so.
If you've ever wondered what this thing is in the back of DDD's boss arena, it's actually a reference to the anime Kirby Right Back At You.
Specifically, it's the monster delivery system DDD uses to get monsters from Nightmare Enterprises.
Now you may have known that if you're familiar with the anime, but did you know that Ted Hahn's name is Haunted with the first and last syllable switched?
There's at least one person watching this. Another weird detail is that this game lets you smuggle items in between doors. In most Kirby games, going through doors makes you spit out whatever's in your mouth. But this game just lets you carry anything through normal doors, through the goal door, you can even pause and exit, and all of this lets you keep whatever's in your mouth and bring it to a different level. I don't know if there's any practical application of this, but it's just one of those things you notice if you played a lot of Kirby. Here's a big one. So throughout the game you can collect different customization options for the copy palette, which acts as your inventory in this game. In the base game, there are only 6 of these: Default, Checkerboard, Cheetah, this angular one, Gears, and Diamond. However, there are actually 4 more event-exclusive copy palettes you could only get in Japan using DS stations, which were these machines they used to have placed around electronics and merch stores that allowed you to download software directly to your DS if you brought it there. Specifically, in 2007, from March 29th to April 4th, for 1 week in Japan, you could go to one of these and get this exclusive Kirby palette, Meta Knight palette, the Roach palette, and DDD palette. Of course, it's been nearly 2 decades since this was available, so as far as I'm aware, the only chance you might have to get this today is if you manage to track down the correct DS station cartridge from Japan on eBay or something, then use it with another DS to download them into your game through Download Play. I don't know if anyone even sells these though, so for now they seem to be lost to time, unfortunately. Moving on to some more obscure enemy details, Snooters attack Kirby by giving him a taste of his own medicine, chewing on him and spitting him out. Kirby isn't the only thing they can eat though. If you position them to come into contact with food, they'll be able to eat that too, although it doesn't actually heal them. Snooters first appeared in Amazing Mirror where they could eat batteries though, so here's a Squeak Squad exclusive enemy, Kret. The useful thing about Kret is that you can inhale its cloud to have a chance of getting either a Gordo, a random food item including Maxim tomatoes, or very rarely a 1-up. Continuing my trend of checking out websites, take a look at the old North American website for Squeak Squad. It's got these interactive bubbles, pages on each of the features of the game, and this simulator for the mixing mechanic in Kirby's stomach that uses entirely unique assets. I love this sort of thing, they just don't make websites fun like this anymore. They also had these buddy icons which you could download, I guess to use in messaging apps and stuff, but I'm honestly not sure if there's a way to access them anymore. If you know where a backup of these can be found online, again, please let me know in the comments, I'd love to check these out. Squeak Squad, like the games before it, brings back the arena mode, this time called Boss Endurance. However, there's a trick that can be used to make this specific iteration of the mode easier than normal. Usually when you die in a Kirby boss rush, it's game over and you need to start the entire mode over again. But for some reason in Squeak Squad, you can actually get extra lives, either by mixing with bubbles or getting lucky with a magic ability. This means that even if you die to a boss, you'll be able to continue where you left off rather than completely restarting. Genuinely pretty helpful. Finally, this is a quick one. If the current day matches the birthday entered into the DS system, upon booting up the game, you'll be greeted with this message. People say this is the worst Kirby game, but it's the only game that remembers to wish you a happy birthday. Oh well, from one of the least liked Kirby games to one of the most, let's go check out... The first game directed by Kumazaki and the last game before the modern era. It is a remake though, so let's just run through 5 facts real quick. I'll start with my favorite detail. The pins on the corkboard, which acts as the menu, are actually color-coded based on the game mode. These yellow pins indicate sub-games which were available by default in the original Kirby Superstar. Blue pins indicate sub-games that needed to be unlocked in the original, and red indicates sub-games that are entirely new to Superstar Ultra. One of those new game modes is Meta Nightmare Ultra, where you play through an abridged version of the game as Meta Knight. After you beat this game mode, there's a rare chance that the intro movie will be replaced with a version featuring Meta Knight. This is what that looks like. Also, Meta Knight sinks his own battleship in this mode. At least it's not as confusing as fighting himself. I skipped a lot of the references found in the Great Cave Offensive treasures in the Superstar section since a lot of trivia videos go over those. But since Ultra actually changes them, I'll go over a few of the new ones. All of the Season Hearts treasures from the first games have been consolidated into the appropriately named Season Heart, giving room for 3 new treasures. The Power Paintbrush, a reference to Canvas Curse, the 3-star cane from Squeak Squad, and the Golden Watering Can, a reference to the item from Animal Crossing. They also replaced the nunchucks with machine parts, referencing Air Ride, and the dud with the cell phone from Amazing Mirror. Also, these carvings, which I think show DDD and Kirby in the original, were replaced with these, which I think show Kirby eating an apple. Here's something most people would just never see. You can unlock the original cutscenes from the Super Nintendo by beating Helper to Hero with every helper, which requires playing through the mode 20 times. You also get a unique congratulations scene and a crown on the Helper to Hero option in the menu. Speaking of Helper to Hero, you might notice Capsule J2 here, where in the original Superstar this enemy was named Capsule J. This is part of a sort of running bit where every time this robot that gives the jet ability appears in a game, it gets a new upgraded model. In the original Superstar it was just J, in Ultra it's J2, and when it showed up again in Robobot it would become Capsule J3. Also, this background, which is new to the remake, implies Meta Knight is mass-producing metal lobsters, which explains why it comes back even after it's destroyed at the start of Revenge of Meta Knight. Also, quick shout out to the blooper reel. I wish more Kirby games had these as bonus unlockables. They stopped doing this with movies too ever since they moved away from DVDs to streaming, but I think we need to start a movement to bring bloopers back. Alright, I'm gonna pause the marathon right there. So far we've gone over 80 facts from the first 10 mainline Kirby games, covering everything from old websites to obscure lore details to scrapped content. Hopefully you found at least some of those interesting. If you did, then toss the video a like. If you didn't, then toss it a dislike. I've honestly been researching this stuff for way too long to tell what sort of facts are well known or what stuff is completely boring to everyone but me. But yeah, part 2 is coming, eventually. Thank you to the Kirby Wiki and the Cutting Room Floor for helping me find more information on this stuff. All of the sources I mentioned throughout the video should be linked in the description if you want to learn more, so check those out, and subscribe to be notified when part 2 comes out. Until then, let me know about any obscure facts you know about Kirby in the comments section below. And that's it. That's all I have to say, because I wasn't planning to write a conclusion here before I split the video. Bye.